I'm not sure if you can see people joining, Drew, but I think we'll give it another minute.
Yeah.
Let a few more people join.
Yeah.
For those who have joined, welcome. Good morning. We're just going to take another minute before we start. Right, I think we're 2 minutes past 10 o'clock by my clock, so we'll make a start. So good morning and welcome everybody. Thank you very much for joining this session today, which is about mastering SIEMs and SIEM migration. My name is Tim Davis. I'm a principal consultant at Adarma, and in conjunction with my colleague Drew Gibson, who is a senior CISO and security strategic advisor for Splunk, we're going to be taking you through what the state of the market is at the moment in respect to SIEM technology, and also some lessons learned and some good principles around if you're considering migrating your SIEM. So hopefully everybody can see the slides. If you can't see the slides, just pop a message in the chat and we'll get that looked at. Also, please feel free to raise any questions as we go along. Again, there's a Q&A box which you can put your questions in, and we'll pick those up, and hopefully, most of those we can address as we go along. If not, we might leave some to the end as well. So with that, I will hand over now to Drew, who's just going to take us through a market update analysis.
Tim, thanks very much for that. Yes, welcome everybody. As we go into this, I want to just go through some of the, why do we do this? Why do we need to have a SIEM? And why do we need to potentially upgrade what we're doing and change and keep developing? Obviously, we see in the news there's been plenty of high-profile attacks that have been throughout the years, but those are the ones that just hit the news because of their size and scale and probably impact on the general public. But there are many more attacks that have occurred, and we see that on a daily basis, those threats that are coming into our organizations. And the attackers are getting better. As with any adversary, they learn, they change, they adapt, they use new technologies. And while we're not necessarily seeing an increase in the sophistication of the attacks because of things like AI, we're certainly seeing an increase in the number of sophisticated attacks as the barrier to entry lowers, because people can use AI technologies to do that. But that means we need to be better dealing with the way that we're managing this. We've also got increased regulation, increased compliance mandates, and we're doing this in an environment for most organizations where there's a budget for this. We can't just throw an infinite pot of cash at sorting this. So we've got to marry all of these things together to be able to understand that. And how do you better monitor, detect, understand what's going on in your environment, and actually be able to manage those, detect and respond to those threats? Here are some of the figures. At Splunk, we conduct an annual report, and we speak to our customers for this. It's not just on kind of on the data that we see, but it's actually engaging with all of our customers. And there is an increase in ransomware, and that has a huge problem for organizations. I've already mentioned AI, and a lot of CISOs believe that while it is a positive, it can help with that because as I said, for the adversary, it can mean that an intelligent individual can actually increase what they can do with the technology. We can also use that to our advantage as well. But there's lots of things out there, and I won't. But it is an increasingly challenging space for us to be in, and that ability to keep up with the threats and monitor what we're doing is always going to be required. But we're also trying to do it in an environment where we're trying to bring things together. So it's developing that security resilience. But for an organization, that's not just our security. It's also, what are those other things? What are those associated elements that we sit alongside those things? There's many attacks. They could look like a normal IT incident rather than just or a normal IT incident could look like an attack. And how do you have that communication? How do you have that visibility to be able to deal with that? And a lot of that falls to the SOC because they've got such a great visibility of what's going on. And that is obviously functioned around the SIEM tool that you're using. Consolidation of security products. How agnostic is your SIEM product? How able is it to encompass the whole of your environment and be able to look at all those data sources, regardless of where they're coming from, their version, or any of those things? And what does that mean for your ability to continue protecting your organization? And we do this in complex environments. I can't do this on a webinar, but was presenting at a conference recently. And when I asked the audience, and over 100 people in the room, how many people are running a hybrid environment, whether that be cloud, prem, multi-cloud, pretty much every single hand in the room went up. And that adds to the complexity of what we're dealing there. But we can also use the tools and the automation to support us. So we know that the downtime is detrimental. We want to minimize that. We want to get that mean time to contain, that ability to understand what's going on, prevent a situation worsening, and to actually help the organization to continue to run their operations and be resilient. We know it's a risk, but how do we turn that risk into a business driver to be able to prove to our customers, to our clients, that actually we're going to be able to continue the operations and actually generate business off it? So we're not just demonstrated as being a pure cost code to an organization because we're protecting, but actually we can be in there helping to prove that actually this is the reason we should be doing business together. Regulation, it's always going to be there. It's going to grow. And it doesn't matter which sector you're in, that is always going to grow. But how do you make that as seamless as possible? How do you actually use that technology to demonstrate what you're going to be doing? And how do you make sure that you're continuing to innovate? Because as the attackers innovate, we need to be doing it at the same speed. So hopefully that sets the scene for you a little bit. If anyone's got any questions about anything, I'm happy to answer them either now or at the end. But Tim, over to you. Thank you.
Tim, you're on mute. We can't hear you.
Thanks very much for that, Amy. Thanks very much, Drew. Thank you for those points. What I wanted to do was just follow on really from some of those drivers, some of those business needs, and some of those talks about the attacks and threats, and take you through like a bit of a summary from our SIEM migration guide, based on the understanding now that you're kind of in a position where you're thinking about and you want to understand if it's right for you to perform a SIEM migration, and then really how you would go through that SIEM migration. So the next few slides take a step-by-step kind of basis through that life cycle. It is a generic approach. As Drew said in that conference, the complex environments that people have got, you're going to tailor this environment really to fit that complexity. Some customers, some environments may have a single SIEM, some may have multi-SIEMs, some may have, a whole federated environment for detection. So obviously take this as a kind of a generic approach really as well. Also, there's another couple of introduction points I just want to point out, which is you can do a migration in a single kind of step, but you can also do it in phases as well. So again, there's another kind of aspect you can consider, where you gradually move across coverage, move across certain use cases and detections as well as you're going along. So something else really to consider as I take you through these kind of steps. One other important thing that these steps have built into them is that they gradually build up a level of trust, so that when you do get to that final stage and you do want to cut over onto your target environment, you've built that trust within your stakeholders that you've got that cyber risk managed. There isn't going to be anything that's going to get missed. So, so we have built that into these steps as well. And that's a really important theme that will come through the actual steps themselves. So starting with this slide, arguably you could say that these first three steps are the most important steps. If we look at this, it's really all about making sure you've got clear direction and clarity about what you're looking to achieve. So if you're unsure that your current SIEM is giving you those cost effectiveness, those efficiencies, that coverage, that functionality you need to go back out to the business, and you need to really truly understand what it is that the business needs to be covered from a cybersecurity perspective. What is driving that change? Are you looking to bring in to your cybersecurity environment OT, IoT, as well as your IT environment? These kind of aspects need to be properly really understood. How much time do you actually have to make any changes? Are there any key drivers, contractual, commercial, business drivers that you need to be understanding as well? And coverage is another really important one. Are you looking really just to cover from a cybersecurity perspective, or does the business now need you on the SOCs to cover off from a compliance, insider risk, fraud, other kind of aspects as well that will inevitably drive a different solution, a different technology choice as you go through this life cycle and process. So can't emphasize enough really this first step to go out and make sure you gather those requirements correctly. Then you can move into your actual tool selection and through your procurement, obviously assuming that you've gone through an initial internal business case, investment case cycle on there as well. And I think you're looking really for some of the advantages you can get with the newer SIEM technology around the scalability, the performance, the ease of use. So a lot of those things should be on that procurement checklist for you to make sure you're getting the advantage of what the new tool can give you, meeting your business requirements as well. So once you've gone through your procurement, validated your business case, chosen your tool, I'm going to take you on now to really the first step within the actual delivery. So this is your delivery life cycle. First thing you really need to do is your more detailed discovery analysis. And at this point, we kind of strongly recommend that you take a baseline in terms of your SOC maturity and capability. Do that assessment to understand really where your strengths and weaknesses are across your SOC. This is not only good to inform what you can reuse, what the gaps are, what you need to change going forward, but also if you repeat it a few months after you've gone on to your target state, you can then quantify the benefits, the change, the advantages that you've gained in the investment in going through the transition itself. So you can see here there's a list of areas which should be there within your detailed discovery. You really need to fully understand the current configuration of your existing SIEMs. Some of those may have been in existence for some time. There might be a lot of history there in terms of why things have been configured as they are, why particular apps, macros, detection rules have been written, why they are. So really getting that full, true understanding of your current SIEM environment, understanding what your coverage is, understanding what your data sources are as well. That is a really important aspect of this discovery, is getting a really detailed list of those data sources that are currently feeding in, and also the data sources that your business requirements have highlighted maybe need to be added to your SIEM as well going forward. Then looking at your detection rules, making sure you've got a full catalog and code sets for those particular detection rules, playbooks, reports, dashboards. Don't underestimate the number of reports and dashboards that have probably grown over time in your existing SIEMs. So again, a lot of end users have created those, so may not be central, and maybe they are linked into other business processes. So really important that you make sure you get those reports and dashboards cataloged as well. Apps, parsers, macros, again, vitally important for the overall running of your SIEMs. Maybe not something that ultimately gets transferred across into your new target environment, but again, really important to understand how you've currently got it configured. Still a few more things in here, such as understanding where you're storing your data at the moment, what tiers, what retentions, all that kind of information needs to be captured as well. And let's not forget one of the most important things here, which is that this is not just a technical project to transform from an existing SIEM to a target SIEM. This is a business change program. So here we need to make sure that we're capturing process information. We need to make sure we're understanding the roles and responsibilities as they stand at the moment across your environment. Who does the engineering, who owns the infrastructure, who owns the end systems, who's responsible for detection, content creation, making sure all of those things are properly mapped and understood before you start this actual migration exercise. And lastly there, I just want to pick up that also making sure you've got information around the integrated third-party systems, such as ticketing systems, reference systems, threat intelligence systems that you've got connected into your SIEM as well. So not to underestimate, a more detailed discovery that needs to be performed following on from the initial discovery that informs the business case. So let's just move on to the design stage here. I think this is no surprises here. There needs to be a target design created. I just wanted to pull out some important parts of the design that it's important to make sure that you give adequate time to. Data collection is going to be a really important factor within your SIEM migration. So important to spend a bit of time on making sure you get that design correctly. And there's going to be multiple ways that you can do data collection. You can do your data collection from the data sources. You can do your data collection through collectors, forwarders, intermediate data pipelining technologies and tools as well. So there's different ways that you can architect that data collection solution part there. Best to get that, properly investigated and sorted. Don't miss out on the DevOps and the wider integration piece as part of your design. It's going to be really important going forward that you can maintain a good DevOps repository and pipeline for your SIEM and platform going forward. And also, as part of your migration exercise, you're going to need to have some dual feeding of data. So you've got an interim migration architecture design there to build, as well as your target architecture. And also, not to forget that your new target SIEM is going to need to have role-based access control and standard security controls around it. What we tend to see is customers, existing SIEM tools have relied upon usernames, passwords. The kind of organizations moved on, uses a lot more centralized enterprise access authentication controls. So there's more work going to be involved in making sure your new SIEM can tie into these new enterprise authentication and access controls as well. So building out that RBAC model and all the authentication controls as well. Let's not also forget that the SOC SIEM and SOC platforms are predominantly data science and data management machines. So making sure you have a data schema, data architecture captured as well is vitally important. Are you going to use common information models? Are you going to use different standards for your enterprise logging? Just making sure all of those kind of things are properly understood as well. And also, as we say, this is not just about the technology, it's about the wider people process. So making sure you're getting your service operating model, That probably will change if you're going to move from a on-prem to a cloud. You're going to move from a technology which is several years old to something more modern. Then you're probably going to find that operating model needs to be tweaked and updated as well. So making sure you get that service aspect updated. Similarly with the processes as well. So can't underestimate there again the design steps on this. So once you've done that design, then the next step is to get your baseline build in place for your target architecture. So here you'll have your existing, SIEM SOC platform running in parallel with your new build infrastructure. Obviously, then you can carry on your operations while you're building your new environment. So you can see here, following on from the design conversation we've had, that building in all of the aspects in terms of the data collection, the network connectivity, the DevOps, the pipelines, the processes. Also looking now whether you can take advantage of some automation around containment, as well as maybe enhancing automation around enrichment and investigations as well. I think what you will find is that it's not going to be solely a change around the SIEM. SOAR, case management, a lot of those kind of tools are also very closely integrated with your SIEM as well. So those are going to be affected and probably will need some additional build and changes applying to them as well. Building that RBAC model, building those third-party integrations, and also not forgetting that we need to build in how we're going to capture the metrics for the SIEM, the detection and response aspects, and being able to capture those and report those going forward, so we can give good visibility of how the SOC and SIEM tools are performing as we're going forward. So that gives you your build. What you need to do then obviously is test that build, make sure data can flow, make sure that everything is performing, make sure you've got a good solid base there for your infrastructure before you start looking at data and your actual content on it. So that's your first kind of step on your trust baseline, that you've got infrastructure which is robust and performing as you need it. So I'm going to move on now to the next step in your migration, which is really about dual feed. Now, as I said earlier, there's a sequence here which I'm kind of describing, but in parallel to this step, you could also be looking at some of your content as well. So, it's not just sequential. There are other things that you can do in parallel, and that'll help you with your overall timescales for your migration. But the purpose here of dual feed is that it gives you the ability to demonstrate and evidence that you've got a reliable, robust, and you've got parity with your target SIEM to how your existing SIEM is working. But don't be surprised though if the data doesn't 100% align up between your existing SIEM and your target SIEM here when you're looking at dual feeding, because modern SIEMs will calculate data, events, records in a slightly different way than your existing SIEMs. So, you're going to have to do some interpretation of the data coming in terms of how many records you might have in an index, how many events you're seeing from particular data sources. So there's work going to have to be done here to demonstrate that you have got that parity between your existing SIEM and your new SIEM in terms of data collection coming in. Now, it is going to be a challenge here in terms of how you get that dual feed to work. As I said earlier, you can dual feed from the data sources, but some data sources, may have a challenge in terms of either compatibility with some of the newer collections, or they may not have the compute memory space in order to have two agents, two event collectors on at the same time. So you're going to have to look at the different types of endpoints, different types of collection mechanisms, and work out what is the best way here that you can dual feed, whether you need to put an interim collection method in place or whether you can go directly from the data source. And obviously that decision as well is going to influence how you then cut over. Obviously going from the actual source is probably going to make it easier from a cutover perspective. So yeah, again, multiple things there to consider really when you're designing and performing your dual feed. And I've just listed here some of the kind of areas and examples of dual feeding for you to consider. And I wanted to emphasize that you're not only looking at dual feeding from your data collection perspective, but you could be dual feeding from your reference data. You could be dual feeding your threat intelligence into both of your SIEM tools, dual feeding your asset information, dual feeding your ticketing system into the new environment. So there's a whole kind of ecosystem of dual feeds that you need to really create, ideally to test sources, but if not to production sources as well. So that will take a bit of time, but it then does give you the advantage then of being able to really truly prove and get confidence that you've got parity between your new and your old SIEM environments, and really to give a really good reflective testing of the new environment before you actually cut over. So moving on to the next step then, as I say, this can be started in parallel with the previous steps, but once you've got your data in place, then it really helps your content then to be migrated. And I think we're seeing a lot of benefits from customers taking a bit of a fresh approach to their content, not just taking a lift and shift of the 100 rules I've got at the moment, let's just move those across. Sit down, take a look at those rules and say, do they actually meet my threat model? Are they still relevant? Do they actually work? Have they actually fired? Could I do this in a smarter way? Is there out of the box content that I can adopt that would do the same thing? So go through that process with your SOC teams, with your analysts, work out, what actually is still valuable that you've got at the moment. Map that against your threat model as well, and really work from a more refreshed kind of perspective.
Tim, I think that's a really valid point, that looking at the use cases and the outcomes, because modern SIEMs, they're far more efficient in their use of the use cases and the way that they use the data to drive those. When you're upgrading your SIEM, I think that plays back to what you were saying last time about the parity, because if you're upgrading your SIEM or you're migrating, you're going to hope it's going to do better, but it's a lot of that will focus around those use cases, and it's not always a like for like, because the use cases will be more efficient in the way that they use that data for you.
Yeah, so really important here. And there's a lot of improving tools here that can help you out with this content migration. That there's a lot of translators, there's a lot of mapping tools. AI now can help you with this content migration. So, there's a lot of help in moving this across and not making this step such an onerous overhead for the actual migration itself. So make use of those tools when you're performing this particular step. So once you've got all your content across, you've tested your content, you're going to have to test each rule. You're going to have to work with your SOC team and say, take a look on the target environment. Is that rule working in the way that you expect it to work? If you're doing any comparisons against the existing rules, you can look at how many alerts were created. Is it firing in the same way? Is it working in the same way in terms of multiple instances of the alerting as well? So a lot of work needs to be done there with your SOC teams to make sure that they're happy with those new rules that you've got migrated across. So once your SOC team and all your content's migrated across, and as I say, this could be one of the steps where you might prioritize some of your content and decide post go live you're going to move across some maybe lower priority content as well. So this could be one area which you can maybe save a bit of time, and this could come down to agreeing with the business really what the priority threats are on that threat model. So let's say now that you've got all your content working on your new environment, you're at the point now where you want to cut over. This really is a kind of classic service kind of cutover step here, where you're making sure that you're meeting all your cutover criteria, both from a service perspective, your platform performance, stakeholders can gain access, everybody's got the training in order to be able to use the new platform. Everybody's maybe done a desktop exercise with your SOC to go through a few of the use cases on the new platform to see that the playbooks work, that they can investigate and got the access to any new systems in order to perform those investigations as well. So once you've all those those testings have been performed and you're happy, cutting across here, you're probably going to have to do a couple of things. One is obviously cut across the actual queue for the tickets, so that tickets stop coming out of your old SIEM and your tickets then start coming out of your new SIEM into your ticket system. And also you're going to have to look at your archive data that's been kept on your old SIEM, making sure that that is brought across and topped up onto your target SIEM as well. You're going to go then into a number of weeks of higher level of monitoring. There is going to be some tuning. There is going to be some unexpected things, but hopefully those are things that won't need you to revert back. Those will be the things really that you can then fix as you go along. So you'll need a period of kind of enhanced support, making sure you've got the network, content creation, developers, those kind of people who can make testings and tunings to any issues that arise at the time. So that's really from a cutover perspective. I haven't covered decommissioning. I think that's something that will vary across each scenario. You may keep your legacy SIEM tool in a read-only mode for a while. You may actually decommission it straight away. It's not just about the actual central SIEM tool, but also the data collection items as well that are related to that SIEM tool as well. Those will need decommissioning. So there's a relatively, not big, but a major, a significant piece of work there in order to decommission that existing system. So I just wanted to really just go back and pick up on a couple of key takeaway points, really from a migrations lessons learned perspective, just to pull those out for you. I think number one is this is not solely a technology project. SIEM migrations, really are a business change. You need to understand who your stakeholders are. You need to get your business sponsors, your funding. You need to get your communications working right, and really to be a success. You need to make sure that the SOC charter is up to date and you've got clear business support for that SOC charter. What is the SOC mission? What does it need to perform? And have you got the funding really to support that? That's going to be a really important document to make sure you got in place that will then drive what your migration needs to achieve and how you go about selecting your new target SIEM as well. Another key point I wanted just to raise really is that you need to keep an eye on the cyber risks as you go through your migration. This is what the business will be looking at. You need to make sure that as you transition from your existing SIEM to your new SIEM, that business risk which the SOC is mitigating doesn't fall below that kind of business risk appetite. You're keeping the business informed and you're making sure that the SOC is able to keep the level of that risk mitigation that is necessary as well. And that really is about monitoring, about the dual feeding and about the communications that you need to perform. Another key point is really give yourself more time than you think and plan as early as you possibly can. As I say, being a business change project, there will be lots of teams that need to get involved that maybe the SOC team don't get too involved on a frequent basis. There may be third-party outsource suppliers that you need to involve as well. So it will involve multiple parties involved in this. So give yourself time to plan correctly. This is also not just a SIEM program. It will involve other aspects of your SOC tooling as well. So really think of this as a SOC platform transformation or optimization project as well. But at the end of the day, if you get this right, it will be a really good enabler for making other improvements across the wider SOC as well. It will really release up more time. It'll make things happen quicker. It'll give you more efficiencies. So there's a lot to be gained by performing these particular migrations. And I think the last point I just wanted to raise really was that as you go through the SIEM migration, the hardest changes to make are going to be those ones which are out of your control. So get a view on which of the changes are out of your control. Maybe they're with a third party, and get those looked at and discussed with those other parties and what the dependencies are as early as possible. So that's what I wanted to cover off, to give you really that kind of summary overview of our SIEM migration guide. I don't know, Drew, if you have anything else further you wanted to add from your perspective, or if there are any particular questions that we could pick up on.
No, I think that's it. Very comprehensive. So thank you, Tim. I think that where we've seen the real successful SIEM transformations and transitions, it is that final bit, is that planning. And don't ever underestimate the time in planning, whether that's working out the outcomes, the use cases, the data sources, and making sure all of that work is done before you start the process. Because the more preparatory work to make sure that everything is going to work, that the compliance of the data sources, that everything's going to model up, that when you actually start the process, it is relatively simple. I know that sort of sounds like a no-brainer, but there's a lot of people who jump in both feet and try and get things to go because they just want to get on and do things. But don't underestimate that, just taking that step back, that extra moment in planning and preparation will absolutely bear dividends going forward when you do the migration and the transition.
100%. I see, Drew, that we got a couple of questions coming as well. Should we
Yes.
ease off? Would you be okay to pick up on the CapEx OpEx one?
Yes. Sorry, for some reason I haven't fully.
I can read it out if you want.
Yeah, if you don't mind, thank you. Oh yeah, sorry. What do you need to factor in the cost of migration? Is this usually considered CapEx or OpEx? Yeah, it is a good question. It is the likes of Adarma. It is always worth, when putting in that budget, factoring in, especially if you're moving, not just up, sort of upgrading the provider you've got, but factoring in training for users, making sure that they know what they're going to do, and that training is done up front. So that is a bit of an upfront cost. One of my colleagues who ex-RAF, ex-Royal Navy helicopter pilot, he's very, very firmly of the belief no one would have ever let him get in a helicopter and learn to fly it without any training. But training him first off meant that he was able to get in and actually do it. And it's the same with the SIEM, that actually, and it also is part of the promotion of it to your SOC team, actually, because then people are excited about what they're doing. So that helps with the messaging of the transformation and everything else that you're going to do. So I'd always put training as part of the CapEx, but make sure there is then an ongoing budget for that. Same with the professional services, the support and everything else. So majority of this is going to be a CapEx, but understand that to keep yourselves up to date, there will always be an OpEx to it in terms of training and support services.
Great stuff. And maybe if I pick up maybe on the next question on AI, maybe you can then add from your perspective as well. So from a migration perspective, what we've seen so far from an AI perspective is certainly on that content migration. We've seen AI being used, and in a case where the detection rules are fairly simple, there isn't too much macros embedded into detection rules, for example, then we've seen it very successfully used in order to convert from one particular language to other languages as well. So again, and I think that will grow. I'm certainly seeing huge improvements on those kind of mapping tools as well. So because of that use of AI on that content migration side, I think I would recommend people look at translating a lot of their content into a kind of agnostic format, an English kind of agnostic format side as well, using on that. And obviously, from a migration perspective, we've also seen AI coming in as functionality on the actual new SIEMs as well. So featuring into what Drew was saying about training and allowing customers to be able to start using some of that AI technology as well. Anything you want to add to that, Drew?
No, I think that's pretty comprehensive. I think that know how you want to use it at the start. It is, dare I say it, there's a lot of people who ask for AI without fully understanding what they want. And I'm not saying this audience, but we see it a lot in a lot of the RFPs that we see. And it's, what do you want it to deliver and where is it going to generate from? And I think that's the important thing of, is it actually going to deliver the benefits, and is it going to deliver them from a known set of data so that you're not going to create problems down the line. So yeah, I totally agree with you on what you said, Tim.
Super. Okay. I've got one question, and then I see, but then we've got another one as well around strategies recommending for capacity monitoring. Maybe, Drew, if I ask you to just think about that question from Pervez,
yes,
while I just answer another question, which is really about timescales. We get asked every time, how long is this going to take? It's a tough question to answer. You can probably you can take a good stab that it's going to depend on variables. I think I've not seen anybody do it below 3 months. So I would kind of recommend taking around a 6 month, for a fairly standard migration. When you start building a lot more complexities and multiple SIEM environments and a lot more data sources, you're probably talking, above that 6 months kind of time scale. Just some of the parameters really were what changes that time scale. I mean, they're the obvious ones in terms of how many data sources, how many rules, how many playbooks, how many integrations as well. But also, I think some of the other things that affect that time scale are really around some of the internal complexities, some of the internal governance, contractual relationships. So how many suppliers and parties and people are involved in that particular migration as well will have an impact on the overall time scale. So try and hopefully give you a guidance there on timescales.
I think on that one as well, Tim, to add to your point, to the planning and preparation, I've got one customer at the moment who are trying to migrate 16 different SIEM technologies. And there's a lot of crossovers between the SOCs that are running into a single centralized SOC. And they started off with, this is the critical data, this is the one dealing with the critical data, but there was 2 years left to run on the contract. So don't just look at it in terms of data criticality, and some of them that is, where is it in the contract, where is those things, and that might be a driver. So you mentioned it there, is work out where are those problems. My last organization, we were running 5 different SIEMs, and that was because someone had written them all into contracts. So how do you then get out of those contracts to actually rationalize what you're doing? So quite often it's not the technology or the security problem that you're dealing with, it's the procurement and the contractual areas. So you need to be aware of the other factors around that. I think that on that one, then it sort of comes on to, you said about the capacity monitoring, keeping log of ingestion volumes. Yeah, really, really good question. And some of it comes down to basic hygiene. Lots of people write their use cases. It's about then having an ongoing process, I would say, for verification, updating, making sure that you're constantly staying on top of it, that actually the customers we see who probably keep those down the best are the ones who they have a really good cadence, whether it be weekly, fortnightly, monthly, depending on the size of the organization and the number of use cases they're running. That are they delivering what they should be delivering? Are they being driven by the right data sources? And if they're not, actually change things and have a mechanism to change them quickly to be able to stay on top of that process. I've seen customers where they've brought in data sources and never dropped them off. and they've never optimized their searches. So actually, their log ingest goes through the roof because they're trying to search every bit of data every time, and that just means that they're not getting the benefit out of the SIEM that they want to get. So I think very much some of it isn't just down to the technology, it's around the process that sits around it and the way that you manage it and staying on top of those hygiene factors, really.
I think that's great. And I think I would also just add that it's also about making sure that you're keeping aligned with the threat model as well. So is the data that you are ingesting, if it is growing, you've got a clear link back to the business to say, why you need that data, and you've got the justification then really for the investment needed to handle that data.
Really good point. Yeah.
Okay. Have we covered off all questions? I think we have. Is there anything else that you've got, Drew?
No, thank you very much.
So I hope that was useful for everybody. It's very difficult to compress such a big topic within such a short period of time. So if you'd like to know more about it, there are a number of guides out there, including one that we've just published as well. So you can download that from the adarma.com website. And if you've got your own questions around SIEM and SIEM migrations, then please do reach out to the hello@adarma.com mailbox, and more than happy to sit down and really just talk through any questions that people might have about their SIEM migrations as well. So I think Drew and I would just like to thank you, everybody, very much for attending. Hope you found it useful, and wish you all a super day. Thanks very much, everybody.